go. We're recording. So amazing. I loved it, man. I loved it. So many parts of the acting was great, of the breaking of the fourth dimension, like playing with fiction and reality. The whole, there's Plato's cave in one point. There's Parmenides' argument of the non-generation, that everything is connected, the unity of the cosmos. We have Socrates, of course, the voice of the daimonion, right? That he talks there. Just there's some ancient Greek philosophy there, but man, I loved it, man. Of course I laughed on a lot of points. Some of my comments were like LOL, like brutal truth mixed with like intense fiction, and then the whole like capitalism hanging all over the like all the corporations capitalizing on truth, right? Like people wanted to hear.
Yes.
People wanted, they were getting angry. So, well, I have a lot that we can go over, man. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Bruno. Sorry.
It's okay. It happens.
Yeah.
Let me just echo that. This was a great viewing for me, and this is probably the third time that I've seen it, and it's gotten better every single time. And I think that just where to even start. If I could just start just by saying, like, the reason why I chose this movie is actually later this month, I'm going to Estonia, where I've been invited to show a movie to a small philosophy school in Tartu, Estonia. And I chose this movie because I wanted it to basically frame it as, this is what happened to America. When we talk about how, even Faye Dunaway's character says that anger sells, that she wants angry content. And this has only become more and more relevant, almost in a warped and twisted way today. And I think that this happened, news became something that needed to be profitable, and news became entertainment, and truth became entertainment. And then when truth became entertainment, the question became, what's the most profitable form of entertainment? And the answer is anger. And that's where we are now. Where the duopoly of Google and Facebook is basically the only way you can create a sustainable digital media business model, is with harvesting anger. And I feel like there's an updated version of this movie to be made, but instead of network, it's called platform. And instead of Faye Dunaway as the television person who's lost the television generation who's lost her humanity, it would be maybe Zendaya, who can only communicate in ironic memes or something like that.
Yeah. And YouTube, man, when she said, like, when I remember the name of the guy that falls in love with Faye, that's her name.
Yeah.
This guy, he says, like, on your generation, you grew up watching the tube. Everything you know, it's from the tube. On my generation, we have something we used to call like regular human decency, those kind of things. And right. Then they speak about love, and she doesn't know what love is. She doesn't understand love, because of the fleeting concept of switching channels and just changing stuff over and over. I mean, we can start from the beginning, if that's okay with you. I have some comments from
the
roots of it.
You mentioned. Well, I was gonna say, you mentioned capitalism, and I think there's so much to talk about there. So that might be just like an appropriate thing, just to make sure we do address that. So why don't you get started?
Yeah. Okay. So on capitalism. So one of the, well, as most people that are watching this know, that one of the greatest critics of capitalism is Marx, of course, right? Like he designed the as a philosopher, you are treading on new lands, right? Like you're sailing on new lands. And arguably one of the best parts of Marx's work is that he developed the language, the concepts and the language to understand what capitalism was doing to us at the early stages, right? Like, and without the language, we can't imagine what's happening. So one of the things that one of his critiques was that once capitalism gets out of hand, everything becomes about money. Like even like friendships, love, like family, everything is absolutely becomes about money. And I connected with they call it in the movie the corporate cosmology, which I think it's just frightening, a frightening concept, like the corporate cosmology. And I love it how they show that in the movie. Like they put it on a very dark scene, and the guys like what was his name?
It's Ned Beatty.
Yeah, Ned Beatty.
The characters. I can't remember the character's name,
with,
but yeah.
With a J. Oh, you know the name of the actor? Wow. So yeah, Mr. Joden or Jobin or something like that with a J.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Jensen, Fazian or Faison exactly. Said it in the chat. Yeah.
Jensen, exactly. And he kind of played the role that Beale was doing. Like he got with like a prophet, and then he spoke some truth, some more truth, like a superior truth. And that was for me, that was a great moment on the film, because he said like there are no more countries, there are no more ideologies. It's it's not even like about like the communists and the capitalists and whatever. It's just about a system of systems based on dollars, petrodollars, electronic dollar. And I'm like, wow, like shit. Then I thought like, what is this guy gonna do? Like the Beale guy. And he got into a position of hopelessness, right? Like there was a lot to do, because if I think one of the problems with capitalism is the level of complexity of it all. Like the role of each person in such a complex system of systems, it's complete helplessness, right? Like we're just ants swimming in a massive ocean of 10,000 dimensions, and you know it's pretty tough. And then the cynicism of it all when the people got together to discuss what they were going to do, because Jensen didn't want him out, still wanted him, you know, because he connected with because he was pushing the corporate cosmovision. But then here's a question: was Jensen interested in him because he was pushing the corporate cosmovision, or because he was interested in what was going to happen when he kept saying the truth out there, you know?
So in my opinion, the way that I interpret it is that, and this is also just something, so just to kind of like step back to this, and I'll eventually get to your question.
Yeah.
There's a very obvious way to read this movie as a critique of capitalism, in that capitalism is just kind of this horrible virus that will co-opt any attempt to criticize it. So when Howard Beale says, get mad as hell, you know, because the system is creating a horrible world for you guys to live in, then people end up just it becomes a product, and people start screaming, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, and it gets completely divorced from any anger. It comes divorced from the meaning, and it becomes the saying itself becomes like a commodity. Futile. So there's that, but completely futile. But I also think that I've been reminded recently of, I believe it was on the origins of totalitarianism, where the philosopher Hannah Arendt talked about, she says that, you know, if you read the introduction to the Communist Manifesto, there's a way that you could interpret it as the greatest love letter to capitalism and the greatest appreciation of how powerful it is. Wow. And how awe-inspiring its complexity is, because of its ability to protect itself. And I think that capitalism creates this society of artifice, and that necessarily creates a huge demand for authenticity. But the genius that this movie points out the omnipotence of capitalism is because it'll always create a new veil, but the design of the new veil will be the kind of like disillusioning from the bullshit. So like, you know, if you're peeling back the curtain, whatever is revealed behind the curtain is what the new curtain is going to look like. And that's the power of capitalism.
More
That's
layers.
your question.
More layers.
Right. More layers. And to your question about what I think Ned Beatty's character was going for is that people are very inspired by the notion that we can fight the power. But Ned Beatty's argument that he ends up kind of infecting Howard Beale with is that the power's already won. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that, you know, we have already been so utterly conditioned that there's no way for us to usurp the power structure, even if our desire to usurp the power structure is evidence itself of the fact that we can't defeat it. Because again, we can't stay angry. We can only say, I'm angry as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, as an empty, basically call for distraction and entertainment.
Yeah. But I think there's a paradox here, because if, let me try to put it into like, straighten it out, because if people don't like to listen, so people want to hear the truth, right? That's something that we connect with in the beginning, right? Like when the guy said like he was gonna kill himself in the next show, everyone was like, dude, I just love it in so many ways, on a lot of moments. But on the beginning, I was like, whoa, no one heard him because he doesn't have any ratings. And then someone said, and one guy screamed, wow, and then a chain reaction started to happen. And then on his second appearance, he said, he started going slow, and then he said like, because I'm tired of the bullshit. And then everyone was like, oh, here he goes again. And they did it like very, like, it was genius how they did it, because the guy was gonna get fired, like his boss. And he said like, no, let him go. Like he hung up the phone. So he had a second moment, and then the ratings went up. It was like very gradual. So people want to hear the truth, right? And then when this guy hears the truth from a superior, you know, from Miss Jensen, this guy, he gets into a position where he's saying the truth to the audience, but people don't want to hear that anymore. They don't want that truth, you know, because what if that is the truth, the true reality? And now I'm talking about our world, right? Like often with my brother on our podcast, we end up talking about like who commands the world and how the world is going to go, and what about global justice, what can we do? And we end up talking, we sum it up like, the guys that control all the doors, the owners of all the doors, they hold all the keys. Like, so why would they open doors that only they have the keys if they own the doors? Right? Like, why would they let things change, right? And it's a bit sad to say that, and many people don't like to hear it. But the question is, should we say it? Should we, you know, because it kind of sounds pretty like self-defeating, yeah. And talking about our world, we're not dealing with networks. We're dealing with, as you said, platforms, right? Like machine learning, AI, supervised machine learning, neural networks. Well, it's not networks, it's neural networks. It's AI, soft AI, right? And there's this book, well, there's Surveillance Capitalism from Shoshana Zuboff. You've heard about it. And
yeah, I've read it.
You read it? It kind of catalogs the problems very well, the problems we're facing, and how the power has gone out of the hands of governments or of many other kinds of business, and it's now in the hands of Silicon Valley, essentially, right? And but it doesn't really argue for how to, you know, turn it around.
Interestingly, her last chapter is about we need to reclaim our sense of astonishment. In a way, you could almost reword that as we need to be mad as hell and not take it anymore.
Yeah, man. But does she argue for something like we need to like recover our sense of our tolerance? But what's the argument?
Well, I think it's just we need to realize that what these tech companies have done to us is appalling, and that the level of power over our lives that they have claimed for themselves is appalling, and that's the first step. And I don't really think she goes much farther. I mean, she certainly doesn't suggest any particular laws or legislation. I think that overall there's an indication that legislation is the next appropriate step, but she's not overly prescriptive about it. Her conclusion is basically, you've got to get mad.
You gotta get mad. Yeah. So So just one last comment on this, and then we can go back to analyzing the film, because there's so much like to draw from fiction to reality. There's this other book. I think I told you about the book called "Privacy is Power" from Carissa Velis. It's a new book, and she actually is arguing for regulating, well, not regulating, ending the data economy. And she asks a very pertinent question, that is, should everything be for sale? Right? Like, apparently everything is for sale, but should everything be for sale? And she argues for that, well, our privacy should not be for sale, or bonds as friends, as family, our personal lives should not be for sale, and a bunch of things that shouldn't be. But the paradigm right now, like the structure of the world right now, it seems like everything's for sale. And although I agree that the first step is to understand the problem, as Shoshana puts it, like get angry, but then the next problem would be change the problem. And I think that can only happen with the young people, like with truly like very, very young people that are growing on this world. The trouble is that those kids are distracted. They're on TikTok, and their attention spans are shorter, and it's tougher to get the message across. And the technologies are complex. So yeah, it's gonna be a steep, fight.
I mean, yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot to say on that. First, I want to just before I forget, I just want to briefly talk about one of the funniest parts of the movie. And when I said that, like, the grand power of capitalism is its ability to co-opt the systems that threaten it. I mean, the arc of the like badass black commie woman in the movie, from a violent communist revolutionary to somebody who's literally like shooting bullets in a room for a lawyer so that her syndication rights aren't compromised. Yeah. I mean, that scene is so funny. And then at the end, it's a very telling moment when Howard Beale is killed by two different factions simultaneously. One is the capitalists who are just killing him because of money, and then the second are the communists who are just killing him because of money. So the capitalists, capitalism just turns all the communists into capitalists.
They became a TV show. Like they made a TV show out of their pseudo revolution, ultra left, man.
Right, exactly. Like their whole political leftist platform became another veil for capitalism.
Yeah, man. And I love the irony that the master of them all, like the master guy, he was like eating KFC, like he was just eating fried chicken, and she says like the comedy show that like, we're gonna make you into a TV star, and he was like,
like Archie Bunker, and he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, so good. And then you mentioned Marx earlier, and there's like a famous thing that he said in I can't remember the name of the book, but something about Napoleon Bonaparte.
Okay.
Where he said, And I think even last time I made a video with Diego, he mentioned this, like first as tragedy, then as farce. And I think that what we're seeing is really the opposite. And I think that like first as farce, then as tragedy, because this movie also did something very prescient that people have been pointing out now, in that at the very beginning of the movie, one of Faye Dunaway's assistants jokingly suggested, what are we going to call it? The Mao Zedong hour? Like as if that was just something that was so absurd that at least all of us on the same cultural wavelength can agree that that's a stupid idea. And then what did it end up being called? The Mao Zedong hour. And, you know, this has been happening for a long time. You know, there's that meme about how The Simpsons keeps on making jokes that ultimately predicts reality.
Come reality.
Like a couple of them is The Simpsons once made a joke that people were becoming so sensitive that eventually they would want to censor the David statue. That actually has been a real, authentic conversation. Wow. The idea that Disney would be such an oligopoly that they would buy Fox was a joke a couple years ago. It actually happened. Of course, Trump being president was a Simpsons joke. And then, you know, you can search for YouTube videos as early as, you know, 5 years ago where people are laughing hysterically at the notion that he could possibly become president. There's something about this movie that has really predicted the way that, you know, how profit motive will mutate truth in a very, very prescient way.
Man. And even, correct me if I'm wrong, but even in a presidential dinner, Obama made a joke about Trump, right? Like, do you remember that he
oh, yeah,
even like a mansion.
I mean, it was a joke. We all laughed.
Yeah,
everybody laughed.
Yeah. And the thing about that is like he was a popularity contest, and he was extremely popular on the ratings, right? Like he had The Apprentice, and that really like pushed it all the way to the top. Like so what do you think about? Do you think there's a kind of, because they spoke a little bit about, well, a little bit on some parts of the movie, they speak about predicting the future, like the soothsayer, right? Mm-hmm, like the woman that predicted like the future on Wall Street, for example, right? Like, and there's two predictions that both become true. Like it's the same prediction that happens twice. Like at the beginning, she says like, you're gonna get involved with an emotional involvement with an older guy, blah blah, and then it kind of it's gonna happen, but then it doesn't happen, and then when he goes back to talk to her, she says like, well, I saw her again, and she says like it's gonna happen, and then it does happen. So both predictions ended up becoming. I wonder if that's like a hint on what is happening in the world, like how if something catches on, it starts to become reality, and people make it into reality. Out of popularity, it becomes reality. It's kind of,
well, and then and I think that this movie very clearly paints why that happens, because there's a profit motive to do so. And I think that we were talking about Trump. I mean, we could very easily see these exact same executive conversations at Fox News, at CNN, at every network, no matter what their ideology is, saying the same thing. Hey, Trump is getting more viewers, getting us more advertising money, but do we really want to promote his message? And then all of them say, who the fuck cares? We're getting more advertising money.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. And then it got out of hand, like in the movie, man. It's like,
yeah. And then, like, of course, the thing that is often used to describe Trump or any populist, really, I mean, even probably in your home country too, is like that. And you know, Faye Dunaway even says it, like he's articulating the popular rage.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? I got reminded of 1984. Remember, they have like it was called I think it was 2 minutes of rage on the novel. Like every television on the, it was called Eurasia. Their Eurasia,
Yeah.
was it like Oceania? I don't know. It was one of those massive continents, right? Like on the book, and they and everyone got a chance to scream at the TV. Like it was
Mm,
a, and that's emulating the Greeks, right? Like catharsis with Aristotle's Poetics. Like people need to heal their wounds. The thing is that back in the day we used to be, I don't know, millions or yeah, millions of humans. Now we are getting to 8 billion humans. How can something, a system, a play, art, heal the wounds of uh, I don't know, 4 billion people or 3 billion people that are, you know, hurting from several different things? I was talking to one of the guys that work with me on Mindshop about how in the ancient times, like, well, Greece, Rome, art was something deeply practical, deeply necessary. Like you people, you have your food, your exercise, education, and you had your art, right? Like it was part of the daily routine, and it was completely part of life. Today, art has gone to a place where it's on the fringes. Why? Because it doesn't make money, right? It doesn't
mhm.
produce the same money as other things, and I think that's a big part
Yeah, I
of
think
feeling
it's really
stuff, right?
yeah, I think it's really art has a threat from two sides because it's not only that it doesn't produce money, but it's also that we live in a world that is just more anxiety producing than it ever has been. And
Hmm.
we just don't have the stamina, the mental stamina to, you know, to consume challenging art anymore.
Hmm.
Like we're so assaulted with, desire producing images in the form of like advertising just everywhere you look. Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you need to be dumbed down at the end of the day. So it's really an assault from both directions.
yeah. From
And I also want to say, like, the whole Faye Dunaway thing, I really love her character
yeah,
because she really is like the evidence that kind of unchecked profit motive, when, again, like, it doesn't work well for everything. It can have horrible consequences for things like truth. I've often had a conversation with a lot of people and they say that the best ideas will kind of prevail, or like the cream of the best ideas will rise to the top, and I don't believe that at all,
really.
unfortunately.
Hmm.
No, I don't, because I think that people adopt ideas not because, oftentimes people just adopt the most comforting ideas,
Yeah.
as evidenced in the movie. People don't, it's like saying that the
Or
best ideas will rise to the top is like saying the best food will be eaten by the most people, or that the best movie will get the most money at the box office. Like, that's never been the case, because people, uh, you know, ideas are just another commodity that people need to make themselves feel comfortable. No different than a Big Mac, no different than a ticket to a Marvel movie. So, I mean, it's a little bit cynical, but anyway, with Faye Dunaway, I was going to say,
no, yeah.
like, that when profit motive is leveled at the truth, which has now been replaced with entertainment, but she is the embodiment of the fact that our very humanity is also consumed by profit motive, because she can't even feel sexual pleasure without the context of profit accumulation. Even
Yeah.
like during sex, she's like,
She's
I
just,
don't know what to do with my daytime television.
yeah.
We're not getting the advertising money that
And then like the
yeah.
quick orgasm, like just instant gratification, like
Right,
that was,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
That's exactly, that's her generation, and even more so our generation. it is crazy that this movie was made so long ago, because like if you thought people wanted instant
Definitely.
gratification then, I mean, Jesus, if Patty Chayefsky, who's the writer of this movie, this has got to be one of the greatest scripts ever written.
Yeah, man.
But if he was alive today, I don't know what he would say.
Why didn't this movie? Well, maybe I'm wrong, but did this movie made it to like the most popular like tier of on box office? Did it do well?
I honestly think this movie was ahead of its time. So box office, not really. It did get recognized for some Oscars just because, like, William Holden is like legacy Hollywood, and Faye Dunaway, one of the most famous actresses, and even Sidney Lumet is like Hollywood royalty. So it did get the award recognition. But honestly, I think that the movie was a little bit ahead of its time. I think that the conversation that we're having right now wasn't one that was had by most people who saw the movie, although I could be wrong. I'd be interested if anyone in the comments was around when it came out, and if they have a different experience.
One question, Jared, have you watched the movie The Congress?
What is that about?
I don't want to, because maybe that could be my next pick. If you allow me to pick next, that would be my pick. If you
what country does it come from? Because I'm like, wait, have I seen it?
I think the director is from Israel. I think he's from Israel, but the movie's in English. And
no, I don't. Wait a second. I have seen this. This is the movie with the woman who was in The Princess Bride,
House of Cards.
Like half of it is animated.
Yeah, that's the one.
I have seen that movie.
If you watched it, then we can talk about it. No, I'll choose something else.
Yeah.
But wow, I mean, it reminded me of that movie because of the scene where they're all on like this massive like dinner party, and they're like clapping, very happy, like we're gonna be number one. We have the best show. We're gonna have the top 5 best shows, and it reminded me of the moment on the Congress. Well, I'm sorry if someone hasn't seen it. Pause here, but and you said half of it is animated, which that's a kind of a big spoiler if you obviously, but whatever. Essentially, they're in a dinner party, and they're all extremely happy, but they're not themselves anymore. They're just avatars in a parallel world. Not so far as from what Facebook is doing right now, like with the metaverse, or they're trying to do. I don't know if they're going to succeed, because it's a very difficult thing to do, VR is really on its infancy, but I don't want to change the subject. There's another, do you have another comment over there? Do you have another question?
Well, about the Congress, I mean, I do think, so even if you haven't seen it, I want to be able to frame this in a way that it makes sense. But the Congress is, for those of you, what is the actress's name?
I'm going to Google it. I don't remember her name.
So anyway, this actress was very, very popular when she was very young. Robin Wright. Thank you to Faisal in the comments. Robin Wright was very, very famous. She was in The Princess Bride, and she just, was like a young 20-something sex symbol, basically. And then her career was derailed for decades until House of Cards. And then basically, because of her success in House of Cards, she was able to make this movie, The Congress. And what The Congress is largely about is the fact that the television screen co-opted her sexuality and her identity to such an extent that she felt completely dissociated as an individual, that she couldn't kind of put together the notion of herself as a sex object, an image that is reproduced and judged and consumed versus an actual human being. And that's what that movie's about. And I think that this movie, and I think that, they are kind of like interesting sister brother movies, in the sense that like this movie is kind of more about how profit motive can exploit and corrupt the truth, whereas that movie is how it can corrupt and exploit one's sexuality and identity.
Yeah. And also the disconnection from reality, right? Like in the Congress, the people end up choosing illusions instead of choosing truth. Like it's about a pharmaceutical, they devise this pharmaceutical that you take a pill and you get like into a dream world, like Avatar, right? Like, but then at some point, she gets out, not so far from the Matrix, like, well, Plato's cave at the end, and she sees that people are just like, there are lines and lines and lines of people that are just connected to this drug, like to this thing, and they're like living horrible lives, but they're connected and they're enjoying themselves in their minds. And creating multiple realities has become something much more of our age than the television age, right? Like, because on television, it was kind of the same thing for everyone. Although each person gets some interpretation from TV, it was the same program for everyone. Today, everyone has their custom made, stream, yes. Like, like it's self-curating content, as precise as every click, as every scroll, as every tap. It's all mapped for each person. And man, it bothers me so much, Jared. To be really honest, to be brutally honest, I get very sad with these things, man. When I'm watching the
me too.
I'm like, man, what? There's not a lot to do. Like, how can,
So one thing I wanted to say, there's a couple other things I have. One of the things that I think is really interesting about how, if I were to put on like my Zizek hat and like how ideology functions today, there's a really interesting point where when Howard Beale says, I want everybody to say, I want the CCA deal stopped now. And they just like, they say it, but there's this sense that it's really just like a hollow rallying cry. They're not even really paying attention. They don't even really know what's being said. Yeah. They're just echoing.
I thought about hashtags, right? Like that was the first hashtag in the world, like in the 70s, like hashtag I am angry and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like a call for action, but no one really ends up doing anything, right? Like it's just a palliative medicine, right? Like just a little, a little, just to chill out, but not really to heal the wound. And there's a good sketch on this, I think it's from Saturday Night Live. It's called the like hero or something like that. It's like, I know, the couch like hero, something like that. It's like the guy that never does anything in the world. He just likes the right causes and feels good about it. Like screaming to a TV, or out the window, as if that would change things, right?
Yeah. And I just want to bring up, like, so the way that, I mean, I'm basically a Zizekian, like I love the guy. And so like a lot of what happens in this movie resonates with me. And like the way that Zizek explains how ideology, in like his interpretation of how Marx functions today works like this. He tells this joke about Niels Bohr, a famous physicist. And the joke is that, a fellow physicist comes into Niels Bohr's house and he sees a dream catcher on top of Niels Bohr's bed. And the physicist says, you're a famous physicist. You don't actually believe in that stuff, right? And Niels Bohr says, of course I don't actually believe in it, but I've been told it works even if you don't believe in it. And he says that's how ideology functions today. And I see a mirror in the sense that, like, if you ask somebody, like, stop the CCA deal, and you ask them, do you really believe that? They would say something like, no, but I've been told that it's fighting the power and, it'll work. And like my words will produce, positive social change, even if I don't believe in it. And basically the discrepancy is, whereas like Lenin would have said, the people know not what they do, like false consciousness, Zizek says, they know what they're doing and yet they do it anyway. So in the sense, they know that they don't know what this term means and yet they still espouse it because they believe that there's some kind of, I guess they're like almost taking the meaning, like, what's the word I'm looking, how am I,
ignoring, just like powering through, like ignoring the meaning, just doing it anyway.
Not ignoring the meaning, but almost like not taking the meaning for granted. I think what I'm trying to say is, like, the meaning is something that they believe exists on good faith. Kind of like, if you were to tell me like, hey, I've got a dog, but I haven't seen the dog, I would just assume on good faith that you weren't lying to me. And I think that in a lot of ways, like that's how people choose their beliefs these days. That's how they choose their ideology, not because I've seen the dog or not because I am actually horrified at this CCA deal, but because, Mateus is my friend and I believe he has a dog, or that, my tribe has said this hashtag and therefore I don't actually need to investigate the meaning. I can just wear it. I can just promote it. I think that's what I'm kind of saying.
Okay. In some way it's inductive reasoning, right? If you say like you see me like 20 times, like I've seen Mateus for 20 times. Every time I see him, he's wearing a white shirt, right? Like the next time I see him, he's gonna wear a white shirt. Like people already assume on a bunch of things, on a bunch of variables, just assume, like streamlining thought instead of doing the work and understanding what's going on. People just streamline it and just believe it. It's so there's a bunch of rhetoric there. Like people believe that the biggest problems come from some people, like some very specific people. But the truth is, like, for example, Google, the problem we're in data, I'm talking about data, like AI, it really comes from Google. Google is like if it's not exactly Facebook, not exactly Amazon, not exactly, and people hate a lot on Zuckerberg and on Bezos and on Musk and stuff, but really it's Google did they bred on Stanford University, they devised the first surveillance capitalism business model, and they knew that they were abusing because on the right to privacy. Because, well, at the beginning, the business was about essentially doing like advertising for the people, but then they inverted it with the, how do you call it, the auctions, the auction system that Google does, and they started selling to business. So we stopped becoming their customers. We just became, and we're not even a product. We're
their raw materials.
The raw materials for them to make the product, right? And no one really talks about it. No one really knows. People don't really know because they've done such a good job on PR, like public relations. So people don't know that where that is, and they just assume that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah. A lot to say there. I mean, what's interesting is, like, I'm actually like deeply in trouble in work right now because of my criticisms of Google and Facebook. And it's interesting, like, when you say that people don't really talk about this, I think a lot of it is because a lot of people, like, we're all working for them in one way or another. There are people in my department, their entire careers are built off of like how to manipulate Google and Facebook to make money. And so if I criticize Google and Facebook, like, yo, this is my career, man, don't fuck with me. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so I think that there's strong incentive not to criticize and not to think about this.
And
in the same way that, like, because I'm being Howard Beale at the end, where I'm saying, like, and nobody wants to hear that.
So here's another thing that we should look into. It's the concept of debt, right? Like not debt in money, like in favors. Like someone makes a favor and people feel in debt to return that favor, right? And there's a phrase that I'm sure it works in English. In Spanish is like, well, it doesn't matter how it is in Spanish. It's like, don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? Like in this case, how much do we owe Google, right? How much do we owe them? How much they have done for us for free? Of course, the biggest, air quotes in the world, because they're taking much more than we think. Actually, they owe us. And I think, by giving us free products, they've made the most profitable company, arguably the most profitable company in the world, like out of thin air, you know. And who does the checks and balances on Google? Like, how do we know? Because you said like a bunch of businesses are going through, you know, a bunch of not only businesses, universities, institutions, even the governments need to invest in Facebook and Google. If not, how can one do a decent political campaign without using ads? It's completely unthinkable.
Well, I mean, that's the unfair, and I would go as far as to say unethical advantage that Google, and that's part of the Google and Facebook duopoly, is that right now, every business in the world, or Facebook and Google, knows more about the product and the consumers of every business in the world and every political party in the world. We are and of course they won't tell us, but that's just the level of power they have, because they hoard all of the data for themselves. So like we're all playing by their rules.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I have a good question on that note that I thought about it this week, which is this: how are we gonna take it back? Okay, how are we gonna take back that power? And I'm not talking about like you and me. I'm talking about how are the governments gonna recover that power? Because I don't think a fine, you know, and going on the direction of the movie, I really think it's possible that in the future there's going to be an actual coup, like, because I'm talking not from the people take over the government and then do a revolution like in the French Revolution kind of fashion. I'm talking about companies doing a coup on the governments and taking over the world.
I mean, it may have already happened, right? Like, I mean, you know, I mean, like really Google and Facebook can just press a button and then like determine the Mexico election. You know what I'm saying?
I know it's happening under cover, right? But I think it's happening implicitly. I'm talking about it happening explicitly, like out of the blue. Like they imagine the U.S. government tries to. This would be a good movie. Like imagine the U.S. government like tries to find Google and Facebook, and suddenly they say no, like we're not going to pay that because we have like Boston Dynamics robots, we have Tesla cars, and we have like, you know. And what would happen? Well, the US has the army, right? But then they can shut off the servers. I mean, everything's online. They can
so long as our guns are still mechanical and have bullets, I guess there's, you know, I mean, as grim as that sounds, like I'm saying like that's kind of our only. Yeah, I mean that's the only real way I see it happening. I mean, you know, the other option is that, of course, like, you know, Zuckerberg or whatever the Google guy's name is, you know, have
we don't even know their names. It's Sergey Bin and the other guy, I don't know.
Oh, but he's what are they, like head of the board? No, the Indian American guy.
Now he's CEO. The Indian American guy is CEO, and the creators are Sergey Bin and another guy. But you see, we don't even have their names on our consciousness, right? We have Elon Musk, we have Bill Gates, we have Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bezos, you know, those guys. But I think
Sundar Pichai, Dion just said it in chat.
Sundar Pichai, exactly.
Yeah,
but the amount of power that they have, I think it's unprecedented. Like, it's much more power than the networks had that we saw in the movie.
Yeah, and likely more power than the CIA has, and the FBI, and the So more to your question, I think kind of like two questions is that like this movie has made us reflect on the fact that you know, art can be co-opted to kind of like allay a revolutionary sentiment in the guise of revolutionary sentiment. But what does this movie do to us? What are we doing with this conversation? Like, is this just, are we no different than the people shouting, "I'm angry as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore" in the audience?
When I was 27 26 or 27, I was working for a pharmaceutical company. Well, a glass manufacturing company that made glass for pharmaceutical companies. And I got to a point where I realized that it was so evil in so many ways. And I'm talking only about one industry, and so empty that I decided to dedicate my whole life to this fight. And how am I doing it? Through education. So I made a plan. I quit my job. I studied philosophy to understand the principles, like logic, truth. And as a philosopher, you end up choosing some problems to work on them. And I chose the ethics of AI, so philosophy of AI. I plan on dedicating my whole life to this, like from teaching philosophy, so people can, I think if people can't really understand the problems, they can't even imagine solutions. And that's what I'm doing. This movie like really wakes me up on other levels of like the thing that like it's already there. There's a lot of people thinking like us. But this is why I asked you the question, like, why didn't, I think this is like I suppose it has a cult following, this movie, right? Like it became kind of a cult film across the years, because I don't know if it got to or the interpretations of this film maybe took, it was in the 70s, maybe it took a long time. But people want to watch Dune and stuff. I don't know. Have you watched Dune? Is it?
I haven't. You know, I know that that's got like a huge cult following. I've just never really. I'm not that really into kind of like the more fantasy sci-fi elements. I usually like to keep my sci-fi pretty sci.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what does this movie do? I think it's a great vehicle to. But here's the thing. If there's not a good interpretation of the elements and the themes and the plot and what the movie is doing, and how they're breaking the fourth wall and they're laughing at themselves and they're mixing like the bearded lady. Remember they used that example, like the whole circus. It's the prophet versus the bearded lady, right? Like because on one side of things, this guy Beadley, I forgot his name.
Ned Beatty.
Beatty, yeah. He's like a prophet for the people, but then on the network.
Sorry, Howard Beale.
Howard Beale, yeah. Howard Beale. He's the prophet for the people at home watching, but he's like the bearded lady, like on the circus metaphor, like the bearded lady that's making all the money, selling the tickets, like getting the ratings. So if people understand that interpretation and they see that it's a film that criticizes how the world works, I think that it does a great good for humanity. But
I mean, I agree.
If people just watch it without understanding those themes, I don't know if it's going to do the same effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I agree. And I hope I'm not being too idealistic here, but I do think that movies like this and conversations like this can kind of elevate us to kind of levels of consciousness, maybe if it's business consciousness or class consciousness or something like that, that can, inform people at the ballot box, and I think that, I don't want to be too ageist here, but I just fear that, like the Bidens of the world don't even know how to check their email, never mind, understand the complexities of how much power data can give a company. One last thing I'd like to bring up, and then I think we should go through some of the comments in the chat.
What do you think? I mean, what do you think this movie does? Raises consciousness. This is the
potentially. I mean, I think that for our fight, for our generation's fight to kind of reclaim our identity and in even some sense, our freedom from these tech companies, I think that this movie can be a powerful tool to kind of clarify that and elucidate that. which is why I want to get to, I believe it's Bata. Sorry if I screw up everyone's names. I live abroad now, so I'm screwing up names all the time. And the question is, why would we assume evil in Google and Facebook? They, I guess, have all the money. Is this something like the Batman versus Superman if there's a 1% chance thing? So I'm just going to give my answer, and then because I'm sure this is something both Mateus and I are pretty passionate about. So it's not necessarily that like they have too much power and therefore they can abuse it at any time. It's that the actual business model itself is very inhumane. You know, right now, even at the company that I work at, there's like this trendy thing where we all talk about that we are a ethical company because we are all about sustainability and criticizing oil companies and, you know, promoting green energy and everything. And that's a real problem. The kind of breaking down of ecology is a real problem. Yeah. The other problem that is just as important as ecology is the breaking down of our social dynamics and our mental health. And to give you an idea of what Google and Facebook's business model is basically they harvest data from us to understand our most, what's the word I'm looking, our most vulnerable pathologies. And then once they've found that this is how we get this person to buy a product, they then go to all of the corporations and auction off the access to that vulnerability. So let's say that I'm somebody, and all this is done by algorithms. There's no like, even if they wanted to do this, there's no manual checking process to make sure that what's being done is ethical. So let's say, for example, that a young girl feels really ugly when she looks at pictures of her friends on Instagram. And the Google algorithm determines that when she's looked right after she's seen the 5th image of a hot friend on Instagram, that's when you hit her with a makeup ad. And that will increase the percentage of her converting to a sale from 5% to 40%. This is happening millions and millions and millions of times a minute, every day. And because of the way these things work, and because Google wants to optimize revenue, Instagram will show this young girl pictures of hot friends at an accelerated rate to make her more and more depressed, to make her more and more vulnerable to the suggestibility of an ad. So that's just one way in which it's not just the power, but it's actually the business. And again, I think that, our mental ecology is just as much being threatened as our actual physical ecology. So that's one way to think about it.
That's a good answer. So adding on to that, about the business model, I thought about, I think I told you about this metaphor that I came up with, is that many people say that we're the product, right? Like, I think that's very misleading. Actually, we can imagine Google as a knife. They sell knives, right? They sell knives. And we are the sharpening stones, okay? They use us to sharpen their knives, which are the algorithms. And then they use the algorithm to sell. They sell those, not that they sell the algorithm, they rent it to the highest bidder. And then they use that to make their money, right? Like, we are kind of the raw material, as we were speaking. And there's another metaphor, this is about philosophy of technology. Essentially, technology is neutral, right? We've all heard about that argument that technology is neutral, as in, for example, a hammer can be used to build a house or to destroy a house, right? Depends on how you use it. The thing about this kind of technology is that it's not neutral, because if we imagine it as a bike, like a bicycle, for the bicycle to work, for the technology to work, you would have to pedal, right? You move the pedals, the bicycle works, the technology works. But for this bicycle to work, for the Google bicycle to work, for the Facebook bicycle to work, it needs to invade privacy. If it doesn't invade privacy, it does not work. The bicycle would stop, right? So it's not neutral. It cannot move forward without invading. and this is a whole new field. It's called the ethics of technology. Is a whole new field. Just like in the 70s and the 80s, the ethics of medicine were a new field. This is applied ethics, and it's very tough. On what you said, Jared, about the persistence, right? Like on the fifth time someone does something, there are studies on temptation that each person has a threshold of how much they can resist temptation before they cave in. Okay, and this is something that happens on every person, every human. So, for example, if someone is an alcoholic, what's a good idea? Well, remove all of the alcohol from the house. Because there's no temptation. If the guy the guy or girl that's an alcoholic, the man or the woman, they watch bottles of alcohol every day, 10 times a day, there's a good chance that maybe on the eighth or ninth time, and then there's a bunch of side temptations, like there's triggers, right? Like if you smoke a cigarette, if you have a beer, you want a cigarette. If you have a cigarette, you want some vodka, and then the people, as they call it, fall out of the bandwagon, right? So the internet is essentially a mall, like a shopping mall, that is full of the most precious temptations that we have on the most precise moments of the day. And this changes, right? Like when Christmas comes, they have mapped our desires for Christmas for the last X number of years. And on that year, what's the top searches, and then what's the top products, and it's all automatized. And the problem here is that there's no accountability, because there's no explainability. There's no way to explain exactly what's happening on these algorithms. So it's essentially like it's no one's fault, because no one is looking at what's being decided, and they're fighting our temptations, and it's pretty dark. To put it mildly.
Yeah, so I want to address Bata and Dion's questions. So their questions are both what would be an ethical way to go about doing this, and then Dion's question is why shouldn't we prefer to see ads about products we're interested in versus generic stuff? And so I think to answer both questions, I think what's at stake here is like, do we have a right to decide what we're interested in? There's a company called DuckDuckGo that is all about trying to push the conversation forward about being a tech company and having an ethical compass. And the standard that they set for themselves is they will only target ads based on keywords that you search. So the difference is, if I'm searching the Matrix, I have, by my own volition, at least admitted to myself that I'm interested in the Matrix. However, if the Google algorithm is able to, surveil my activity and find out that, like, I have the personality type that might, be addicted to cigarettes, and I'm completely unaware of it, and my doctor's completely unaware of it, because these algorithms can measure activity at an exponentially more sophisticated rate and manner than a doctor can, or that I can, even about myself, do I have a right to, limit my own knowledge of what I'm interested in? Because they can take advantage of me then. There are probably tons of things. I'm sure I would fucking love heroin, although I've never tried it. But the point is that if they're able to measure without my consent my propensity to be a heroin addict, and of course this is an exaggerated example, and then take advantage of it and be actionable upon it, and then sell that knowledge about me, knowledge that not even I know, not even my doctor knows. And if they did know, it'd want to be kept very secret. And they have the right to auction that off to a company that sells clothes or cigarettes or video games or movies. I feel like I should have the right to say no to that.
Yeah, I agree. It's like because the technology is so new, it's completely unregulated. Like people say, and you heard that tech companies are pulling out of China now. A lot of tech companies are pulling out of China because they just published a very structured like AI ethics guidelines. And a lot of companies, they said like, it's too expensive to be there. There's not a lot of data mining to sustain a business, and they're just heading out, you know. I hope that catches on like, because Europe has done some strong work there. But essentially there's, you know, when you're driving on your car and you see like an ad, right? Like a massive ad. How are those called in English?
Like billboards?
Billboards, yeah. There's some points in some cities that it's like stacked. There's like, you see like 50, you know, and there are some cities that have laws against that. Like they protect. Why? Because they want to respect people's attention span, people's capacity to see nature, for example, to seeing a beautiful city, something that's nice. But what happens when it's too clouded? It's like, because they want to make a lot of money, and those things are very expensive. The billboards are very expensive.
Helsinki is one of those cities.
They defend that. They clean that.
Yeah,
up.
there's I mean, when compared to New York or Los Angeles, there's very little advertising in like physical spaces here.
That's good. Here in Mexico, there's not a lot of protection on that side. There's some places that is like a wall of a bunch of different things, and you're driving and you're like, and they use marketing techniques logically, right? They want to make the best out of their money, out of their investment. So they use nice colors, they write stuff. And I'm not saying that people are going to crash. I mean, not necessarily, but people, if you're thinking about something and you drive there, forget about that idea. That idea is going to break down, and the mind, you can call it like the monkey mind, right? Like starts jumping from many places, and that doesn't really gets people anywhere.
Yeah, what's coming if it hasn't already? And I'm sorry, I mean, I think that this movie is an appropriate kind of entry point to talk about tech ethics, because this is about, you know, this movie was in a different time in the 70s when, you know, it was television ethics was a big thing. And Marshall McLuhan, who I think is not somebody who studied in philosophy departments because he's more media studies, and I think that's kind of a disservice. And he was very popular at the time, but I do think that the more relevant version of what this movie brings up is tech ethics. But what I was going to say about your discussion about billboards, what's coming, if it's not already here, is that there are all digital billboards, and they're going to track when your car is coming. Oh, Jared's driving. Jared likes video games, so we're going to show a video game ad by the time he gets there.
Like in Blade Runner, in some ways. Like, remember that?
Yeah, and Minority Report.
And Minority Report. It's happening right now. There's a French company called JC Deco, and they actually are the ones that invented digital. No, they invented outdoor furniture. So outdoor furniture is like when you're in a bus stop and there's an ad there. JC Deco pays for that bus stop and gets the chance of putting an ad. They make a business and they work with the government, and they have a nice place, which is kind of nice to grow the city, to make it nice. And then they have advertising there. And now they're working on a new technology that is called DOOH. So it's digital out of home. So it's the billboards that we watch, the digital billboards, and they're using machine learning to see what kind of people drives on which kind of streets at what time of the day, and they can put exactly that. So the next thing would be what you say, that they have like, they can track your phone, and if enough people with some kind of phone drive that way, they change it because of the phones. That's already in the works. It's in the oven. So they're working. Yeah.
So just more on the chat. So I think that Bata actually made an interesting point, and they said that they actually prefer Google. Bacha. I'm so sorry. Bacha mentioned in the chat that one of the reasons they prefer Google is because it's smart at finding out what they like. And of course, Bacha has every right to prefer that somebody, use a lot of technology to, serve them things that they like. Here's the disagreement I think Bacha and I maybe have. Actually, I think Bacha's going to agree with me. I don't think they have the right to do that without paying you. And I think at the end of the day, if this were to be done in a just way, the government should, or somebody should say that, okay, either A, these tech companies have to start all over and can only harvest data with people's explicit permission, expressed permission. And then even if people give them permission, you have to pay these people for their data because we are the raw materials. Exactly. And BAT coins. I would prefer it's not crypto. I would prefer that it was and I know that it's like really hard to create the infrastructure for that. I would prefer that it's a little bit more of a stable currency. But yeah, like the point is that like, imagine if, because right now, Bacha, every time you search for something in Google, even though it's not strenuous labor for you, the effect is basically you're going out and chopping down a tree and then donating that wood to a company that sells wood. It doesn't matter how much labor or how difficult that labor was. You deserve to be compensated for something that you are providing someone that they're making money off of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I participated when I was doing my master's in London. I participated in a tech dinner club. Did I tell you about this, Jared? I think I haven't.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it was very cool, and it was not secretive, but it operated under the Chatham House rules. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but essentially, whatever you heard on the dinner club, you can say it outside, but you can't say who said it. You can't call names, right? But whatever you heard there, you can use it, you can say it. Those were essentially the chat house rules. And I had dinner with a guy. He was right beside me, and he studied at a great university, and he was, he said he made his first £1 million when he was, I don't know what, so potentially a millionaire. And he was working on tech at the moment. And he said this crazy idea. He said, I think, and we really got into technology and AI and stuff. And he said, I think in the future, phone companies are going to pay people to use their phones, right? And this was back in 2016. And I'm like, what does this guy know? Because today, how much is the new iPhone? How much does it cost?
So much.
So on top of, it's a great business model. Like on top of selling the device, they're making a lot of money. So I think with regulation, they can still make money even if they paid us to use their phones eventually, because the phones are going to get cheaper. The devices. The problem is, are we going to start getting our share of what we're doing? Because the question is, like, for example, I go to the store and I buy some chips, right? Or I don't know, whatever. I buy some popcorn, and then I come back from the store to my house. Who owns the trajectory, the from my house to the store and back? Who owns that? Intuition would say that the guy that walked, right? Like whoever walked, not anymore. We don't own how we move, because
we should, unless we make the decision to sell it, and we can do that. We just have to have that choice,
And it gets trickier, because there was a group from MIT, I think, that they tried to calculate how much would a person, because one idea would be, because I think a bunch of us would accept, like if Facebook says, okay, pay $5 a month or X dollars a month, and we will stop taking your data. If they, like Facebook Premium, like a lot of people would do it, I believe, if it's a reasonable price. The thing is that it would make Facebook go bankrupt. It would destroy their business model, because they would have to charge so much, and no one would pay for that. No one would pay at all for those kinds of services. So it's very tough. They're in a very sticky situation. Once people start realizing how much data is worth, is much more than oil. Like they say data is the new oil. I think data is much more, because data keeps on giving. Data is the gift that keeps on giving, because it's like they discover new correlations. Like in 5 years, the data they're getting today is going to be worth much more, because it's aggregated. It's not exactly exponential, but to some degree, it's accelerating its value. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The only thing is, like, you can't calculate data without oil. So
okay. Energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not saying that like it's a utopian vision that because as Breer, I hope I'm saying it right, is saying in the chat, lower class individuals will probably sell their data, the wealthy will likely opt out. I mean, that's true, but I mean, right now, I mean, in my mind, like, hey, I would rather, like, get fucked and get $10 for it than get fucked and get $0 for it,
Yeah. I think there's so talking about potential routes to solve this, like there's really, I think there's two general ways to go about it. One would be top down and the other would be from the ground up. Like I'm talking about, like, government would have to push legislation and control the algorithms from the top, cut on the source, or individuals are going to have to demand from the bottom up, right? Like, actually, there's some interesting initiatives from where you're living right now. I'm not sure if it's Finland or Norway, but essentially on this region of Europe, they're working to fight fake news and conspiracy theories by teaching people. It's called digital literacy. I don't remember if we spoke about this, but they're teaching people, especially people from a certain age up, like essentially not to believe everything that is and those are other kinds of effects that are produced by this other side effects from the same technology, right? Like teaching people critical thinking, logic, and trying to get into the root of the issues, right? Not only accepting everything at face value, right?
And speaking of which, the topic of the event that I'm going to Estonia for is about conspiracy theories and arming specifically high schoolers is one part of the thing, with the ability to evaluate them. So
pretty cool.
I think we should probably get this go. So Dion just said he's got to go. I don't know if you're still here, Dion, but thanks for coming in. I saw on here Paris Stu is here. Paris Stu and I had chatted once on what's that shitty app that was once really cool? Clubhouse.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say it.
Yeah. So guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
This was such a pleasure, Mateus, and really a very successful test in my mind. Honestly, the thing that I wasn't sure about, I was sure that we were going to have a great conversation. I was sure it was going to be fun. But the thing that I'm most happy about is that the streaming worked. It was watchable. You live in Mexico, I'm in Finland, and like we barely had any lag.
It worked. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be the philosophy of anything if we didn't see both sides. Like the good side of this technology, the cool arguments that we can do this.
That's right.
We met online. We've never seen each other on the physical world, although this is physical in some way, but out of the digital world. So there's a bunch of it's a mixed effect. So there's a lot of thinking to go on. Dude, for me, this has been, besides a great pleasure, a true honor, Jared. I mean, I know you don't see me like this, but I'm a fan, man. I'm one of your fans. I've one of the two channels really connected. I connected with two channels that became really big. One is Wisecrack. So I've seen a lot of videos from you, man. And like Earthling Cinema. I don't know if you were involved. I'm sure you were involved in that.
Oh yeah, I directed every episode.
Dude, I fucking loved it. Like I've watched everything. And the other channel is School of Life from Alain de Botton in London, right? But
yeah, he was an investor, or actually his wife his wife was an investor. You know, his wife is the rich one. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
we can talk about that later. But yeah, man,
Yeah.
it's a true honor. Like having this conversation with you, talking about movies. This is really a dream come true. Really.
Yeah, man. Likewise, I've loved being introduced to the world that you and your brother have created, and the work that you guys are doing, and the just hearing about your business. I'm really happy that you were able to turn such a noble passion into a livelihood. And it's so funny that like I'm in the opposite. Like I just went from trying to make a noble passion into a business, it almost killing me. And now I'm like, you know, kind of like undercover in the world of being a scumbag making money.
Dude, so two comments on that, and I think we can call it a night because we can go on. Dude, well, I have 64 comments on the movie, on the whole movie. We could do we could record a bunch of stuff on that. But two comments. As you said that you are on your job and you had a good perspective of this technology. Marx did the same thing to study capitalism. To study capitalism, Marx went to London. Well, he got banished from other places, but he ended up in the best possible place to study capitalism, which was London at the time, right? So it's good to be for you to be there. I know it's gonna be it's a tough thing tough place to be in, but you know you got to do the fight for the right things on the right places, right? And my second comment is it's a pre-Socratic philosopher, Heraclitus. He said that before Plato started talking about justice on the Republic, Heraclitus gave a conception about justice. He said that justice is struggle, justice is war. The only thing that can bring justice is struggle, is friction. So being on tough places and saying difficult things, that's justice. There's no well, according to Heraclitus, there's no perfect form, like Platonic form of justice. Justice is what we make. So, dude, stay strong as long as you can. And I don't know, maybe there's something bigger that's happening for the near future. You know.
I hope so. Yeah. And then just for Sunday, tomorrow for me, because it's Saturday morning for me. I'm going to go live. I'm going to go live and I'm going to break down my top 10 favorite Wisecrack videos that I made. And I'm looking forward to doing that. Nice. Because, you know, it really is my life's work up until this point. And I'm very, very proud of it, even though I'm not involved anymore. But yeah, anyway. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. I think we're definitely going to do this again. I don't see any reason not to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's going to be tough to keep keeping this rhythm.
Keep it. Yeah. I mean, network is one of the goats, but I hear you. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching and joining us. Have a great night. Mateus, always a pleasure, sir.
Yeah, likewise. Take care, everyone.
All right. Take it easy, man. All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.